Imagine being called a desperate lowlife by your own father. Well, this is my stepmother's doings because she absolutely lied and said I stole my stepsister's college fund. I haven't even stole a piece of bubble gum in my entire life. So you know what? I'm going to do something kind of crazy, and when my dad comes groveling back to me after he realizes the truth, I'm not going to say anything to him. I'm just going to walk away.
My dad is trying to get back in contact with me after years of no contact, and I don't know how I feel about it. I haven't seen him since I was 16, and we haven't spoken since I was 17 when we both attended my grandmother's funeral. Which I'd say was less of a conversation and more him trying to get away from me when my aunt tried to get us to talk to each other. We never had a particularly close relationship, even when I was young. In fact, for most of my childhood, we did not have any relationship at all. He walked out on my mom shortly after I was born and never looked back. To be perfectly honest, I didn't really care. I didn't know anything about him other than his name, and I would have gladly kept it that way for the rest of my life. Obviously, considering that I do know him, that didn't work out. When I was 13, my mother, she passed, and with nowhere else to go, I ended up with him. It wasn't like he chose to take me in, he legally had to, and I was miserable for it. It was clear that by the time I'd been thrust back into his life, he'd already moved on. He was remarried to a woman who had her own daughter a couple years older than me, and they didn't even know I existed until I was quite literally moving in with them. It was not a pleasant adjustment. As you can imagine, moving in with 3 strangers, one of whom had decided he didn't want you before you could even talk, and the remaining 2, having not even known of your existence, was an awkward situation. Part of the legal requirements of me moving in involved having my own bedroom, which would have been fine since they lived in a 3-bedroom townhouse, except my stepmom and stepsister had converted the spare room into a decked-out dressing room / walk-in closet. Me moving in meant they lost that, which was not a great note to start on with first impressions in mind. All things considering, my stepsister, who I'll be referring to as Sally for simplicity, was actually pretty okay. I mean, don't get me wrong, she wasn't some perfect older sister who I immediately connected to and formed a deep sisterly bond with. We were not close. I wouldn't even say that we were friends, really, but we tolerated one another. Occasionally, we allowed the other to borrow a pair of jeans, or maybe even a pair of earrings, stuff like that. We didn't really talk otherwise, to be honest with you. My stepmother was a very different case. She did not like me. Don't get me wrong, I don't think Sally did either, but her mother could not stand me for the moment I set foot in the house. I guess she saw me as some horrible tie, straight up to my dad's past and constant physical reminder of this first wife of his. So I did my best to absolutely stay away from her. She especially hated it when I'd go and borrow anything of Sally's. So I eventually just stopped doing so and just tried not to get her way ever. Anyways, then when I was 16, guys, she accused me of stealing Sally's college fund. It was an absolute mess. I mean, I was actually 16. I came home from school one day to find Sally sobbing in the living room, my stepmother trying to absolutely console her, and Dad just pacing in front of them. Guys, the moment I walked in, my dad and stepmom blew up, accusing me of stealing the money my stepmom had saved to cover Sally's college tuition because I was a horrible, jealous child who could not accept that Sally was allowed to have things that I couldn't. According to her, she noticed that her debit card was missing earlier that day and had been looking for it everywhere. And when she couldn't find it, she decided to call her bank. They told her that the accounts had been completely drained over the last few months. Other than 3 of them, I was the only one who would have had access to her purse and the debit card. I vehemently denied everything. I want to make it clear, for the sake of this post, I did not take her money. What would I have done with it at that age? Where would I have put the money? When would I have the time to withdraw it, let alone spend it? It didn't matter what I said at that point, though they'd already decided that I'd taken it. My stepmother especially went on and on about how horrible it was of me to steal from them. To steal from my own stepsister? They told me that I had 1 week to return the money or they'd have no choice but to kick me out. They wouldn't have a thief living under their roof. I spent that week begging my father to believe me. I hadn't done it. She was lying. I didn't know why, and I still don't know why, but she was lying. Before the week was up, my stepmother, quote, found ATM receipts in my bedroom. They gave me one last chance to fess up, give them the money that she claimed I'd stolen, and when I didn't, because I couldn't, my own father kicked me out of the house, saying that he didn't know how to live with the fact that his daughter was a desperate lowlife, who would steal from people who took her in. I was 16. I didn't know what to do, so I just walked until I reached my school. I sat there until I finally calmed down enough to call the only person I could think of calling at that time. My aunt, my father's sister, who'd I only met after I moved in with Dad. I barely knew her, but I was desperate, and miraculously she took me in. Even after she spoke to my dad and clearly believed that I stole the money, she let me stay with her until I turned 18, because she didn't want her brother to get in trouble for abandoning a minor. Living with her was fine. I mean, not great, but it was definitely livable. She cared about me enough to keep me fed and clothed, but I knew she thought that I was a thief. I left as soon as I could. I was with her for 2 years, and I spent the 6 years since building a life for myself that has nothing to do with any of them. The only one I've been in contact with is my aunt, and even then the extent of the relationship is just exchanging Christmas cards and maybe a happy birthday text. She's the only member of the family that I have any semblance of a relationship with. I haven't spoken to my dad, stepmom, or stepsister in 8 years. Until last week, I started getting what I thought were spam calls at first. I just ignored them until the text started. I have a Samsung phone that automatically filters spam texts, so when it didn't remove the text, I decided to actually open them. It was my dad. I'm not going to include like a full-on transcript, because I've deleted a lot of the messages anyways, but the words are pretty much seared into my brain. He said hi. He asked how I was. He said that he heard I was just moving into a new spot. He said that he should have never sided against his own daughter, that he should have believed her when I swore to him that I hadn't stolen, that he could see now that I have been trying to show him back then, and he said he was really wanting to see me, that it'd been nearly a decade and he wanted to make amends. He wants to make amends after nearly a decade of silence, huh? Yeah. After throwing his teenage daughter onto the street because he took the word of his new wife over his own blood? After I begged him to listen to me, I begged him to believe me. He wants to make amends. Well, I deleted the whole conversation and blocked him. I hate that part of me. I almost regret that I did that. The rest of me is so angry. How dare he try to reach out and make amends after everything he did? After letting his wife frame me like she did, I don't even know what the purpose of this post is now. I think I wanted advice at first, maybe, but I don't even know what anyone could say to make things better at this point. I'm angry, really, but mostly I'm hurt. I just feel like I've spent 8 years building myself up from the ground, and a handful of text messages just make me feel 16 all over again. Update number 1. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel. I'm feeling a touch of hysterical right now, but I live alone, and everyone I know, I never told them enough about my father or my whole family situation for me to want to drop this all on them with no warning. All of you, however, already have the backstory, so you'll have to do. He turned up at my house. Yeah, my home. My father. The man who threw me out of his house, who called me a desperate lowlife and chose to believe his wife over me, that guy. He turned up at my front door looking like he was expecting me to just run into his arms and wail about how happy I was to see him again. He sure as hell looked rumpled when I just stared at him and went to shut the door again. He yelled for me to wait. But when I paused, he just started rambling, going on about how he'd made a mistake and how the moment he'd seen her true colors, his exact words, He'd left my stepmom and came to find me, hoping that it wasn't too late to make amends with his daughter. Guys, I'll admit, I should have just shut the door right there in his face, but I was curious. I asked what he meant by seeing her true colors. He tells me that he had been tricked by his wife into thinking that I was an unruly problem child, that the moment I'd moved in, she had begun complaining about me, and at that time, I borrowed anything from Sally, she would claim that I stole it. He claims that he had defended me at first, but slowly that seed of doubt grew, and when she finally sprung her little master plan to go ahead and get rid of me, well, to frame me for stealing the college fund, he was too easily convinced. For years afterward, he'd actually really wanted to reach out to me, his only child, but he held back because of what he, believed that I'd done to his wife and stepdaughter. However, according to him, as the years passed, my stepmother's facade began to crumble. Gone was the woman he thought he loved, instead revealed to be a master manipulator. When he caught her in a lie, he suddenly understood that she must have been lying about him and had left immediately to find me, despite Sally apparently begging him not to leave. He said that he'd left everything behind for me, his family, his job, everything. He only wanted to be reunited with me and said that he had only hoped that once he had told me the truth of the matter, that I would not fulfill my duty as his daughter, and take him and support him, and he had left his job for me. After all, he was getting old, too old to work. I just stared at him, and for a while, I'm sure it was a while, I didn't know what to say. I was running dry. It took a full minute for my brain to catch up with every single thing that was said. When it did, I couldn't help it. I just started laughing like a lunatic. I stood there at the doorstep laughing in his face, just short of pointing and, mocking him. I just kept laughing even when I found the strength to pull myself back inside fully and shut the door. I was even laughing after I shut the door. I laughed and laughed and laughed until I cried. Because my nose is stuffy and my eyes are red now, and like I said, I'm, a little hysterical. He wants me to fulfill my duty as his daughter. He claims that he left my stepmom and stepsister, begging for him to stay because he had seen their true colors and wanted to find me. He just also wanted to stay with me and have me support him conveniently, because he wants to make amends, of course. What rubbish. The moment I calm down enough, I'm going to try to find Sally's phone number and ask her to come to get the man she'd begged to stay and get him away from me. For now, I'm going to just keep laughing. Update number 2. The only obvious way I could think of to get Sally's phone number without asking my dad, which was obviously out of the question, was to ask my aunt. I was reluctant to do so given the following reasons. Firstly, I tried to limit contact with my aunt to the bare minimum. Christmas cards, birthday text, that was really it. She wasn't the most pleasant woman in the world, far from it, really, and she had always maintained the belief that I was guilty, a little thief, and despite the fact that she took me in, that fact being the only reason I stay in contact, really. Secondly, my dad had gotten my number and address from someone. Considering I kept in touch with a grand total of 2 other people in our limited extended family, one of which is a distant cousin who lives in Canada, and the other being her 2-year-old daughter. The obvious culprit is my aunt. Maybe my cousin could have leaked my phone number, though highly unlikely. My address, however, brand spanking new, was known only to my aunt. For the aforementioned Christmas cards, still, if I wanted to get to Sally, who unfortunately did not keep in touch with my Canadian cousin, I had to go through Aunt Bethany. The conversation was about as pleasant as I'd expected. I said hello, and she told me I didn't call enough. I asked her if she had Sally's number, and she told me that I had more important matters to tend to first, such as the fact that my father had come to make amends with me, and I'd only turned him away. But I'd laughed at him. Out of my own home. I didn't want to correct her and say that he never actually entered the home, but I chose instead to let her go on for as long as she wanted, because I wanted something from her. Well, she went on for a very long time. She informed me that my poor father was staying at a nearby motel, and that he'd be delighted to see me, and that I really should be there for him right now, especially after, quote, that woman had tricked her too trusting little brother for years. Oh, well. Ultimately, I was only able to weasel Sally's phone number out of her by convincing her that I just wanted to make sure she knew my dad was alive and well after he had apparently stormed out of their home. Since I was sure she'd be worried and she wasn't responsible for her mother. Oh. I had planned on calling her right after my aunt, but considering how long the phone call went on for, I'm making the executive decision to leave contacting Sally until tomorrow. At the very least. If my dad's still sulking by then, I don't know. I won't want to put it off for too long, but it's been a long couple of days, and I really just want to turn my brain off for a while. I'll call her tomorrow. Update number 3. Hey guys, so it's been a few days since my last update, right? And I feel like I have a solid reason for that. I needed a couple of days to really process everything before I could write it out, but I'll try. My stepmom never framed me for stealing Sally's college savings, it was my dad. See, after my last update, I ended up texting Sally the same night. I figured that she might be weary of a call from an unknown number, just like I'd been when my dad started calling me, and figured that a text was easier. I could say what I wanted without being cut off or getting my words all jumbled up. Admittedly, it was a long text, but I covered the gist of the situation. Dad had turned up at my house, and I didn't want him here. Could she please come and get me? I woke up to a text asking me to meet her for lunch the next day, mercifully a weekend, considering I live on the other side of the state. Well, we decided to settle on a Zoom call. It was weird seeing her face again after such a long time. Even just over a video call, it was weird. Weirder still when my stepmother sat next to her. We all just stared at each other for quite some time, but it was Sally that broke the silence. And I quote you this. So, you did not steal my college fund. I was immediately thrown just by the acknowledgement, but what they went on to tell me caught me even more off guard. They said that around a little over 2 weeks ago, right before my dad started trying to contact me, my stepmother had been home alone when a couple of men turned up looking for my father. After a lot of probing, obviously, my stepmom found out that they were collectors for a loan shark. She was confused since my father had never borrowed any money. He had no reason to have any debts. Well, she swiftly found out how wrong she was. Evidently, my father is in a lot of debt to quite a few people. What he'd been using the money for, you may ask? Apparently, my dad is a lifelong gambler and has developed a hard habit. He gambled, he lost money, he borrowed money to make that up and gambled it again. And the deeper he got into that hole, he was getting lost. So on top of being an addict of gambling, he wasn't even a good person at gambling. Stepmom said that she'd managed to convince the men to leave for now since he wasn't home, and she'd call Sally immediately. When my dad got home, they'd confronted him, and everything had spilled out from there, including the bit about the college fund, that he'd taken the money, and when my stepmom, who had already didn't quite like me, assumed I was responsible, he'd added fuel to the fire. He'd been on the one thing. He was even the one to plant the ATM receipts in my room. He framed me. Let me take the fall for him, and when Sally and my stepmother confronted him when he returned home after the truth was revealed, he fled. Just got into his car and drove away, evidently looking for me either in hopes of getting me to pay off whatever he owed, or just laying low at my place where the collectors would never find him. He pinned the theft of his wife's savings on me, his 16-year-old daughter, and threw me to the street just to cover it up. I'd be darned if I let him think that, I owed him any kind of daughterly duty. Update number 4. Fun fact. I live in the state of Utah. Funnier fact, for those of you, who don't like crippling gambling addictions at least, gambling is illegal in the state of Utah. Apparently, it's also something that's relatively easy to report to the police. Sally and my stepmom gathered whatever evidence they could scrounge up. from bank transactions to Ring doorbell footage of the door at the collectors, and sent it over to me. I called the police, provided the information, and directed them to where he was. Of course, I waited until he was parked outside my house again to do so. I didn't know which motel he was staying at, but I did know that he would try to approach me again. When I informed the police that he was waiting outside my house, they asked whether I felt as though I was in danger, and I replied that I would feel safer if he wasn't here. So they came down immediately. I didn't want to give him the chance to drive off when he saw the cops coming, so I stepped outside my front door and I waved him over, keeping him facing away from the street as I got him talking about, quote, making amends or whatever rubbish he'd been spewing the other day. It didn't take long for the cops to pull up, and by the time my dad noticed, they'd already pulled up and started to exit the vehicle. I want to say their initial approach was as cool and dramatic as a cucumber, like some action movie, but they were actually really calm when they asked his name and informed him that he was under arrest. What was dramatic, however, was when he tried to take off, running towards his car, and he was stopped by the officer closest to us, grabbed by the arm as he tried to run away, but my dad surprised him by immediately using his free arm to sock the officer across the face. Well, obviously, he was caught off guard and dropped his hold on my dad, who immediately took off running. The second officer wasn't nearly as unprepared and was a touch more physical. He tackled my dad like Ray Lewis onto the lawn as he was trying to jump my side fence, bodily holding him down while his partner just radioed something in. I wasn't really paying attention to what any of them were saying. I was just frozen, staring at the scene before me, and frankly, I don't really blame myself. It's not every day you see your deadbeat father get beat up by a cop. Well, beat down is a bit of an exaggeration, but he was definitely going to bruise where he had been tackled and held down. Everything that followed wasn't nearly as dramatic. He was taken down to the station, I went along to give a statement, and everything else was just paperwork. He's still being held in custody since they don't trust him not to try to run away again. And now he's going to face charges not only for gambling, but also for resisting arrest, assaulting a police officer, and property damage since my fence is quite crooked now. So that's it. He's in custody. My stepmom and stepsister now know that I never stole from them, and I'm free to go back to living my own life. Yeah, a touch anticlimactic, perhaps, but I'm more than ready to put this all behind me. Thanks for reading, people. No thanks to all you other people who kept trying to slide into my direct messages. No thanks. I'm taken.